Hi guys, in today's video we'll be building a clone of the Notepad application from start to finish. We'll be using a lot of the UI objects and techniques that we've looked at in previous videos to build a fully functional program. So let's jump into Visual Studio and take a look.
So the first thing we want to do is create a new project. It'll be a Windows Forms app, .NET Framework, C#. We will call this one Super Notepad. Click Create. And so the first thing we want to do is add our note area, which is essentially just a text box. So we'll come into our common controls and we'll find the text box. Now, in order to make a text box multi-line, you can click this small arrow here and you can enable multi-line. And what that does is it lets you resize it, and when the user's actually using the app, it allows them to type on multiple lines. Now, something we haven't looked at so far is docking, but if I click on a control and I come to this dock property, I can set it to dock at the top, to dock at the bottom, or to dock in the center, which is what we want. And what that does is it causes the resizing behavior of the window to change. So as we resize now, that text box is kind of maintaining a very close border with the outside of the form because it's docked to the center. If it was docked to the bottom, then it would stick to the bottom, but it wouldn't stick to the top when you increase the size vertically. So the dock is a really useful tool so that you don't have to keep track of that type of UI change and then redraw the width of a box. You used to have to do all that stuff manual back in the day, and it's nice that you don't have to now. So now that we've got our text box, we will need a menu strip because we need a way to open and close files. Just like with this file menu where we have an open and a close, users will probably expect that your app works just like all of the other apps they use. So it's often correct to try and follow along in those patterns. So we'll just grab this menu strip, drag that onto our form, and we will create a file menu. And in the file menu, we'll have an open and a save. And we'll also have an exit. And if we just run that, I'll just show you where we are roughly. So we've got a file, open, save, exit. They don't currently do anything. We'll need to populate these functions ourselves, but it's starting to look like the Notepad that you expect. So let's close that. I'm just going to do one final thing and select my form and then just rename this Notepad, just so it looks official. So if we go into our file menu and double click on open, we'll start to look at how we can open a file. So previously we've looked at reading the contents of text files using the system.io namespace, and we'll need to do that, but we'll need the user to tell us which file they'd like to open. So we'll start by importing the system.io namespace, and then we'll look at something we've not looked at before, which is the open file dialog. So we'll say file open equals new open file dialog, and then we will need to set a filter. So our Notepad program can only open text files. So we need to make sure that the open file dialog doesn't let the user select, for example, an image or a PDF. So we'll say open.filter equals, and there's a weird bit of syntax that you have to put inside here. So filter is essentially a string, but you need to do it in a very specific format. So we would say we want text files. So that's the description of the file we want. So that'll be shown to the user. And then we put this pipe, and then we put a wildcard.txt. And what this essentially does is it shows this part to the user, and then whilst it's looking for files, it says essentially any file is allowed. It could start, the name of it could be anything, but it must end in .txt, which is very typical for a text type file. So that will just ensure that the Windows File Explorer only shows files that our program can open. And then finally, we can say open.showDialog. And what that will do is it will display the dialog to the user, allowing them to pick a file. And our program will essentially pause at this line until the user makes a decision. So now that the user's made a decision, we need to pull the path out of there. So we'll say var path equals open dot file name. And if we hover over file name, you'll see that file name is just a string, and it's the string for the path that the user has selected from the dialog box. So the next thing we'll need to do is exactly what we did in the previous video when we looked at reading the contents of text files, and that is to assign a new variable, and we'll call that contents, to the value of file.readAllText. If you remember from before, readAllText just takes a path and it returns the string of the contents of the file at that path. So we'll put our path in here. And now what we'll have inside of this string is the contents of our file ready to show to our user in the UI. And the way we would do that is we'd say textbox1.text. Textbox1.text equals contents. And that essentially satisfies our requirement for the open menu. So let's just see how far that gets you. So if we go to file and then open, and this is our file open dialog, and you see here we can select different files that are available on our file system, but it's only showing us the text files and that files that end in .txt. So if we close out of this, you see we haven't properly handled that closing out, but we can look at that another time. So we'll just stop the program. Let's look at how we can save a file. So if we go back into our Form 1 and we double click on our Save button, we'll get our Save handler here. And now, in a very similar way to how we used the Open File dialog before, we're going to use a Save File dialog to save the files. So we'll say var save equals new save dialog. And then we'll say save.show dialog. So we can show that to the user. The user will then make a choice about where they want to save their file. And we will then receive a path as part of the save object. So we can say var path equals save.filename. And then just like we did before when we saved some text to a file, we'll use the file object and we'll use the WriteAllText method. And WriteAllText takes a path and then it takes the contents to write to that path. And we'll pull those out of textbox1.text. Oh, crikey, I'm not having a good day with autocomplete. Textbox1.text. And now, if we go ahead and run our program, we can make a text file. So we'll just call this, just type in text file, and then we can save. And we'll pick somewhere on the desktop, and we will call this one my test file. Press return. So we've saved this file to the desktop. So let's see if it's there. Let's use the open and see if we can read the file. And actually, before we do that, oh, there we go. We bumped into our old friend again. Let's look at how we could fix that. So that's actually caused by the dialog not being completed. So we could actually just check to see if file name is null, and that will save us. So we could say if open.filename is not null, then we are happy to try and read that file that was selected. And if file name is null, well, essentially that means the user didn't select a file. And we'll do the same thing down here because it's sensible to try and avoid crashes where possible. So we could say if save.filename is not null, then we are happy to try and save our file to that path. So now if we go back into our program and try and crash it again like that, if I click open and then click cancel, oh, file name was not null. Oh, crikey. So actually it turns out that when you click cancel, file name is just an empty string. So we can actually just check to see if it's not empty in the same way. So if we go ahead and run it again, and we try and crash it, if we open and then click cancel, you see our program no longer crashes because we've checked for the state and ensured that it's valid for opening a file. And if it's an empty string, then we know that it's not valid, so we don't want to open that file. So let's just relaunch quickly. And now let's see if we can open that file that we saved earlier. So if we go onto the desktop, I've just realized I didn't give it the correct file name. So let's save a new file. We'll call it test. We'll click save and we'll go to the desktop and we'll call it test.txt because our program will only open txt files. Click save, and now if we clear our file down and then open, we see on our desktop we have our test.txt. We can open that and then we get our text that we saved into the file loaded into the UI for us. So that is a roundabout way of making a very simple Notepad-like application. You can see there's a few pitfalls to working with the open file dialog and the save file dialog. You have to make sure that you're not trying to open a file that doesn't exist or that is empty. And equally, when you save your files, you need to make sure that you're saving them with the correct extension, because we obviously filter for a specific extension when we go to open the files.
Hi, I hope you found that video useful. If you have any comments or feedback, then please leave me a comment below. I'm currently doing new videos every single day, so if you'd like to be notified about those, then hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.